Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below, because what you're about to hear is a true story that began with something almost impossible to believe. A forest ranger, left for dead, chained to a tree in the middle of a blizzard. No radio, no backup, no way out. But what happened next didn't come from a rescue team or a miracle call. It came from 5'9" German shepherds who vanished into the snow on instinct and found something no human ever would have. This isn't just a survival story. It's about loyalty, betrayal, and the moment a scarred dog named Peter did what no one expected. Stay with us. You won't forget this. The wind howled across the ridge like a warning, cold, sharp, and endless. Snow slammed sideways into the pines, swallowing every footprint, every whisper of motion beneath its weight. Somewhere in the frozen expanse of Bitter Ridge, a 9 training unit was midway through their winter maneuver. Visibility was poor, radios crackled with static, and the air cut like glass. The dogs, 5 German shepherds, trained for high-risk search and rescue, moved in formation with their handler, cutting paths through knee-deep snow. Then something changed. It started with Peter, the largest of the team. A scar ran down the side of his left eye, an old wound from a mission long past. He stopped, nose to the wind, ears twitching. Then, without warning, he veered left into the trees. The others hesitated just a beat before following, silent and steady. "Peter, hold," the handler called out, voice strained against the storm. But Peter was gone leading, not straying. They weren't lost. They were answering something. Miles away, barely clinging to life, Ranger Ethan Grady hung from a pine tree. Chains cut into his wrists, and blood had crusted down his temple, frozen before it could fall. His breaths came in shallow puffs, barely missed in the cold. His body trembled uncontrollably as the storm closed in, erasing all signs of the man beneath. He had stopped counting the hours. It had been 2 days since the ambush, since the men in ski masks dragged him from his patrol route and chained him up like an animal. They hadn't spoken much, just demands. Access to land, permission to operate undisturbed in a reserve Ethan had spent 20 years protecting. He'd said no, so they'd left him to die. Somewhere between sleep and unconsciousness, a memory returned, one he hadn't thought of in years. A young pup caught in a steel trap on the northern trail. Ethan had been new then, barely trained. But he'd stayed with the injured dog for hours until help arrived. Carried it down the ridge himself. People had called it unnecessary, foolish even, but something in that pup's eyes had stayed with him. Gratitude, maybe, or something older. Now, as the cold turned from pain to numbness, he wondered if that pup had made it. The wind shifted. Ethan blinked against the snow. His swollen eyes struggled to focus. At first, it was just shadows' movement between trees, shapes too large for rabbits, too silent for deer. His chest clenched. Wolves, he knew what to do. Stay still. Don't show fear. But the shapes moved closer. They didn't prowl. They didn't stalk. They approached in low formation, heads held steady, eyes forward. German shepherds. 9s. 5 of them, thick-coated and snow-dusted, each one alert, every movement deliberate, trained, focused, and, at the front, Peter. The scar across his eye glinted under the pale grey sky. His gaze locked on Ethan's. Not curiosity, not fear, recognition. Peter approached slowly and sat, proud and motionless, just feet from Ethan's battered frame. The other dogs fanned out. One sniffed the snow around the base of the tree. Another began digging, revealing the padlocked chain around Ethan's waist. One lifted its head and barked sharp, piercing, then silence. Ethan felt the tears freeze at the corners of his eyes. He wasn't dead, not yet. He wanted to speak, but only a whisper escaped. "Good boy." Peter tilted his head, then stepped closer. He sniffed Ethan's outstretched fingers, bloodied, raw, and shaking, and gave a single, low whine. It wasn't pity, it was acknowledgement, an oath, almost. Ethan couldn't explain it. He didn't need to. Peter barked, again short, forceful. The others responded instantly. Ethan's body slumped as darkness began pulling him under again, but this time there was a thread holding him in place. A thread made of fur, breath, instinct. The 9 team worked in concert, communicating in movements and sounds, coordinating like they had rehearsed it 1,000 times. And then came the sound Ethan hadn't heard in days. Voices, human voices, crashing through the snow. "I see him! Over here!" someone shouted. Boots pounded against the frozen ground. Arms reached in, cutting chains, easing his body down from the bark. Peter didn't move. He stood guard, eyes on Ethan, until the last link fell. And just before Ethan passed out completely, he saw Peter take one step forward and rest his paw lightly against his chest, like sealing a pact. "He's real," Ethan thought, and then nothing. But Peter was not just a highly trained service dog. What he did next would be the beginning of something far greater than survival. It would be the start of a bond, a mission, and a reckoning no one could have predicted. Peter sat perfectly still in front of Ethan, the snow swirling around him as if the storm had paused just for this moment. He didn't bark, he didn't lunge. He simply watched, head high, ears forward, his entire body poised in silent command. There was something unspoken in the way he held himself, more than instinct, more than training, as if he understood that panic would only steal what little strength Ethan had left. One of the other shepherds, a slightly smaller female, began to circle wide around the pine, nose low to the ground. Another positioned itself near the edge of the clearing, facing outward, listening, guarding. A third trotted to the base of the tree and began pawing at the snow with urgent precision, revealing a thick metal chain half buried in the ice. A fourth lifted its head and released a single, high-pitched howl that cut through the wind like a flare through darkness. It was coordinated, tactical. Every movement served a purpose. These weren't just dogs reacting, they were operating. And Peter never broke eye contact. Ethan couldn't speak above a whisper. His throat was too raw, his lips split from cold. But something inside him pushed out the words, "Good boy." Peter, his voice cracked on the last syllable, and tears stung his face, not from pain, but from something far more piercing. The sheer, overwhelming relief of being seen, of being found, not by people, not by his team, but by something more faithful than either. The weight of isolation, the silence, the fear, the endless hours of wondering if his body would be buried by snow and never found suddenly lifted. It was replaced by the warm, burning truth that someone had come, that someone had cared. The digging continued. The padlock on the chain was exposed. The guard dog rotated position. Peter stood and took a step closer, sniffing the chain at Ethan's chest. He gave a short, forceful bark that seemed to signal something specific. Seconds later, another bark echoed from a distance, then another, this time human, and then Boots crunching snow. "Over here, I've got eyes on him." The dog stepped back as the rescue team surged forward, careful but urgent. A woman in tactical gear knelt beside Ethan, checking his vitals. Another sliced through the chain with bolt cutters. As the links fell away and his body was gently lowered from the trunk, Peter stood a few feet back, watching the entire process. He didn't move to intercept, didn't interfere. He stayed right where he was, alert, present, vigilant. Even as they strapped Ethan to a sled stretcher and began pulling him toward the snowmobile transport, Peter walked beside them. Not as a dog being led, but as a silent escort. He kept pace effortlessly, eyes flicking between Ethan and the path ahead, never once distracted. Inside the field ambulance, Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness. He didn't know where he was or who was tending to him. He could feel warmth again, a sleeping bag pulled tight around his frame, heat pads on his hands, the sting of antiseptic on his face. But none of that mattered. Through the haze of painkillers and exhaustion, he turned his head and asked, barely audible, "Peter, still here?" A nurse beside him hesitated, unsure what he meant. but she looked toward the door, where a figure sat tall and unmoving in the snow, framed by the open hatch. "Yeah," she said softly, "he's still here." Ethan nodded faintly, a single tear sliding down into the corner of his ear, and then, finally, his body surrendered, his eyes closed, and sleep claimed him with the gentle weight of safety. But what Ethan couldn't know in that moment, what he wouldn't realize until much later, was that while he had asked if Peter was still there, Peter had been asking the same question in return, not with words, but with presence, with patience, with a gaze that never once faltered, even when the others had to move, even when the mission had technically ended. Peter had not been ordered to stay. No command had tethered him. He simply chose not to leave, because something in him had seen something in Ethan. And from that point forward, neither of them would be the same. The warmth of the infirmary was almost unbearable. After days in the cold, Ethan's skin felt as though it was burning under the heat lamps and thermal blankets. His body ached in deep, unfamiliar ways, bones protesting, muscles refusing to cooperate. Every breath reminded him he was still alive, and every blink was a quiet question: why? He lay on the cot, bandages wrapped tightly around his wrists and chest, the fourth fluids running steadily into his arm. Nurses moved quietly, respectfully, as if understanding that noise wasn't the enemy, it was silence. The silence of being alone in a frozen forest with death inching closer hour by hour. Outside the glass-paneled door, Peter sat, not moving, not barking, just waiting. The dog's posture was the same as it had been in the snow, erect, watchful, patient. The medical staff had offered to kennel him, suggested he rest, but Peter wouldn't budge. He'd stationed himself at the door the moment Ethan was brought in, and he hadn't left since. When Ethan finally regained enough strength to sit up, he saw the figure approach before he heard the knock. Sheriff Ray Dalton, mid-50s, broad frame. That same pressed uniform Ethan had looked up to for years. Dalton had been his mentor when Ethan first joined the Ranger Division, a man of presence, the kind you don't question in a room. He stepped in with a careful calm, eyes scanning the medical monitors before settling on Ethan's bruised face. "You're lucky," he said softly. "Few more hours out there and—" He didn't finish. Ethan managed a dry chuckle. "Yeah, I keep hearing that." Dalton pulled up a chair and sat beside him. "We're going to find the ones who did this," he promised. "I've already got a team working double shifts, checking trail cams, cross-referencing satellite data, whoever it was. They're not going to get away with it." Ethan nodded once, but didn't speak. His eyes drifted toward the closed door. Toward Peter, Dalton followed his gaze. "That dog," he muttered, shaking his head. "One hell of an asset." "Yeah," Ethan replied quietly. "He found me." Dalton opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by a knock at the side entrance. Rachel Vance, the 9 handler, stepped in, her expression tight. "Sorry to interrupt, Sheriff," she said. "Ethan, can I have a moment?" Dalton rose and excused himself, but something about the way he paused at the door, the half-second delay in his step, caught Ethan's eye. Rachel waited until he was out of earshot before she handed Ethan a file. Inside were photocopies, access logs, signed permits, and clearance codes. "That's the form authorizing temporary access to Sector 9, she said. "Signed by you." Ethan frowned. "I never signed that." "I know," she said. "And that's not your handwriting either." He looked up at her, jaw tightening. "How'd they get it past station review?" "That's the thing," Rachel whispered. "It didn't go through station review. It came from administrative clearance. High level. Only a few people have that kind of authority." Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts moved faster than his pulse. The ambush, the remoteness of the location. The absence of search efforts in that quadrant. Someone hadn't just wanted him hurt, they wanted him gone, and they'd made sure the paperwork buried him before the snow ever could. "And the dogs?" he asked. "You didn't send them?" Rachel shook her head. "They were training in a different zone. Their handler lost sight of them after a whiteout. We thought they were off course, but they weren't." Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. So what sent Peter to me? Rachel had no answer. That night, as snow fell in slow spirals outside the station, Peter began growling. It wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, but it was low and steady, rising from deep in his chest like a storm under pressure. Ethan, now in a wheelchair, turned toward the door. Peter hadn't growled at anyone all day. Then the door opened. Dalton stepped in, face unreadable, hands tucked into the front of his belt. His boots squeaked on the linoleum, breaking the hush. Peter stood, his body stiffened, ears back, gaze locked. Ethan said nothing. Dalton looked at the dog, then at Ethan, and sighed. I suppose it was only a matter of time, he said. Ethan didn't blink. You forged it. Dalton didn't deny it. I didn't think you'd survive, he said. Nobody could have survived that storm, not out there. So you left me to die. It wasn't personal, Dalton muttered. You just kept pushing. Reports, blocked permits, ethics reviews. You were getting in the way, and they paid you. Dalton's jaw tensed. They offered more than a salary. Look, I didn't lay a hand on you. I just looked the other way. That's all it was supposed to be. Peter took a step forward, hackles raised. Dalton held up a hand, but his voice was thin now. Call him off, Ethan. But Ethan didn't speak. And Dalton didn't know that what he was about to do, what his hand was slowly reaching for, would cause Peter to move with the force of a bullet. Because betrayal doesn't always come with a shout. Sometimes it enters the room softly. Sometimes it wears a badge. The lights went out at 2:14 a.m. sharp. No flicker, no warning. Just the soft mechanical hum of the generator cutting off mid-cycle, followed by a vacuum silence so sudden it seemed to pull the breath from the building itself. Ethan shot up in bed, heart pounding, every sense abruptly alert. Then came the sound, a metallic scrape, faint, calculated. Somewhere near the rear of the ranger station, Rachel was already at the door. She swung it open slowly, flashlight in hand, sidearm holstered at her hip. Peter moved ahead of her, body low, tail still. He didn't growl this time. He didn't need to. His entire posture screamed a single, wordless message. Something's wrong. Ethan grabbed the emergency radio from the nightstand. Static. Dead. No signal, not even a hiss. They stepped carefully into the hallway, shoes crunching on the old wooden floor. Peter stopped at the corner and turned sharply, head tilted. A soft clicking echoed from down the corridor, too rhythmic to be pipes, too deliberate to be wind. A decoy, Ethan thought. Sound masking. They were being played. Rachel unholstered her weapon. South corridor. Garage entrance. But before she could take a step, Peter blocked her path, standing rigid. Then a blur of movement flashed past the window. A shadow, humanoid, fast. And then the crash. Glass shattered at the far end of the station. A loud, purposeful breach. The kind that didn't hide, the kind that announced itself. Rachel raised her radio instinctively. Station breach. South entrance. Repeat. A loud bang cut her off. The hallway shook with the impact. Someone had kicked in the rear door. Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed the old fire hatchet from the emergency wall mount. Peter took off down the hallway without waiting for a command. The dog moved like a spectre, feet silent, body pressed low. Rachel followed close behind. Flashlight beam slicing through the dark like a scalpel. They reached the supply room first, empty. Then the utility corridor, nothing but overturned chairs. Then, just before they reached the generator room, they heard it, breathing. Low, close, not theirs. Ethan raised his hand to signal silence. Peter's ears snapped back, his body tensed. They flanked the door. Ethan kicked it open, empty at first. Then the flashlight caught the glint of steel. Back! Rachel shouted. A man lunged from behind the generator, crowbar raised. Ethan ducked. The weapon sliced the air above him. Peter didn't pause. He launched himself forward with explosive force, jaws locking around the attacker's arm before the second swing. The crowbar dropped with a clang. The man screamed rage, not fear, and stumbled back, slamming against the wall. "Stupid dog," he snarled. Ethan stepped in, hatchet raised not to strike, but to pin. He jammed the blunt edge across the man's chest, forcing him down. Rachel moved fast. She kicked the crowbar away and cuffed the attacker in one fluid motion. Her voice was steady, professional. "You have the right to remain silent." The man spat on the floor, blood and saliva mixing in a dark smear. He grinned. "You think I'm the only one?" he hissed. Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Check the perimeter," she ordered. Ethan stepped back, heart still thundering. Then his breath caught. Peter staggered slightly, then slumped to the floor. Blood spread from his side, staining the concrete black in the dim light. "No," Ethan whispered, dropping to his knees. He pressed his hands to the wound. "Peter, stay with me." The man in cuffs laughed. "He took a bullet meant for you. Fitting, isn't it?" Rachel crouched beside Ethan, voice clipped. "We need to move him now." Ethan cradled Peter gently, wrapping his arms around the dog's limp body. "Don't you leave me," he said, barely above a whisper. "You chose me, so don't take that back now." Rachel called in the evac team as Ethan carried Peter through the front entrance, blood trailing behind them like a thread, unraveling a story not yet finished. They reached the triage zone just as backup arrived. Officers swept the building, securing doors and taking statements. Peter was rushed into the Mobile 9 surgical unit. No one said much. The air was too thick, too sharp. Everyone knew what the silence meant. Ethan waited outside the unit, shirt soaked in Peter's blood. He didn't sit, he didn't pace. He just stood there, hands clenched, eyes locked on the closed door. Time passed in uneven fragments. 1 hour, 2. The surgeon emerged just after dawn, gloves crimson, face unreadable. "It missed his vital organs," he said. "By an inch." Ethan exhaled for the first time in hours. "He's going to make it." They let Ethan in once Peter was stable. The dog lay under a soft blanket, the fourth in his leg, oxygen mask gently fogged with every breath. He looked smaller somehow, curled there in the quiet. But when Ethan knelt beside him, something changed. Peter opened his eyes, tired, heavy, but there. And when he saw Ethan, his tail twitched once. Ethan smiled through the tears that came uninvited. "You're still here," he said softly. But he already knew. Peter had never left. And in that moment, Ethan understood something deeper than survival. This wasn't over, and the next move would belong to both of them. The days that followed were quieter, but not calmer. Snow still fell across the ridgelines like nothing had happened. Like the blood on the station floor, the sounds of gunfire, the betrayal, they were just rumors, caught in wind. But inside the ranger station, something had shifted, something that wouldn't settle. Peter lay in recovery for nearly a week, his side bound in white gauze, one leg stiff with splinting. But he healed faster than anyone expected, not just physically, emotionally, behaviorally. He didn't flinch at loud sounds. He didn't hide. He waited. He watched. And when Ethan walked into the recovery bay one morning, Peter struggled to his feet without hesitation. The tail wagged, slow but steady. The media called him the silent soldier. Headlines ran for days. Hero dog saves ranger. German shepherd brings down corruption ring. News crews tried to get photos, to turn the moment into a banner of hope. But Peter never looked at the cameras, only at Ethan. The state offered commendations, medals, an administrative position in Helena for Ethan, complete with full pension, housing, and a climate-controlled office far from the snow. He declined. "The forest doesn't need another politician," he told the board. "It needs someone who'll stay when it gets quiet again." Rachel found him later, standing near the southern watchpost with Peter beside him, both of them watching the tree line in silence. "I figured you'd say no," she said, handing him a folder. Inside was a transfer offer this time, from within the 9 division. "They're willing to make Peter active again," she said. "Not standard protocol, but after what you two pulled off, they're calling it special integration." Ethan didn't answer right away. He ran his hand gently along Peter's side, fingers brushing the edge of the healing scar. "What would it mean?" "You'd both be partnered full-time," she said. "Stationed here. Official badge for him, unit clearance for you. And if I say yes," Rachel's voice softened, "then we keep doing what you're already doing." just with backup this time. Ethan looked down at Peter, who looked up in turn. There was no wag this time, no sound, just the same unwavering gaze that had pulled Ethan back from the edge of death. "I'm in," he said. The team was restructured. New protocols, a leaner, tighter crew. Background checks were redone, patrol routes adjusted. For the first time in years, the ranger station felt less like a checkpoint and more like a line in the sand. Peter, now fully recovered, resumed his rounds. He walked with Ethan at dawn and dusk, moving from sector to sector with purposeful rhythm. Deputies began referring to them simply as the pair, and something about that felt right. Until the footage came in. It was late one night. Rachel had stayed to audit the surveillance system, one last check before turning in. Most of the logs were quiet. Deer near the north trails, snowfall accumulation over the cabins. But then, at 03:47, one frame froze her hand on the keyboard. It was the east cam, just outside the Sector 9 perimeter. A man, standing just beyond the fence line, motionless, wearing a dark jacket with a silver badge clipped to the chest. He didn't move, didn't enter, just stood and stared. There was no timestamp after that. The feed cut to static and returned to normal 10 minutes later. Rachel didn't tell anyone right away. She didn't need to. That morning, as Ethan poured coffee in the staff kitchen, Peter froze. He turned slowly toward the east-facing window, body stiff, ears tilted back. Ethan followed his gaze. Nothing, just trees. But Peter didn't blink, didn't relax. Rachel entered the room quietly. "The cameras picked something up last night," she said. Ethan waited. A man didn't come inside, badge on his chest, stared straight at the lens, then vanished. Peter's tail lowered, his stance changed. His body shifted forward half an inch, like a wire drawn taut. Ethan took a breath. So Dalton wasn't the end. Rachel nodded once. "No, there's still someone out there." And in the pit of Ethan's stomach, something tightened, because he already knew where they'd have to go next. A place long marked unsafe, condemned, off-grid. A cabin where decisions were made in whispers, and where silence still lingered on the walls. He looked down at Peter. The dog was already facing the door. And the man they were about to meet was waiting at the edge of that cabin, where no one was ever supposed to return. The cabin sat like a ghost at the edge of Sector 9, half sunken beneath snow and shadow. It had been marked condemned for years, a warning scrawled in red across the rusted door, "Unsafe, do not enter." Dalton had closed it off after a wildfire nearly gutted the place, claiming structural instability. No one questioned it, no one came back. Until now. Ethan and Rachel approached from the east, careful to avoid the main trail. Peter moved ahead of them, nose low, breath steady, his body slicing through the powder with practiced silence. The trees were brittle with frost, branches arching like ribs overhead. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of three souls moving toward something they couldn't unsee. The cabin door hung slightly ajar. Peter stopped short, his ears tilted back. Rachel raised her weapon. Ethan crouched low and signaled. They moved in tandem, circling to flank the structure. Every inch of their movement was measured. No words, no second guesses, only instinct. They slipped through the side entrance into dust, rot, and darkness. Inside, it was colder than the forest. The stove was dead, but the ashes were fresh. Rachel found boot prints in the corner, still crisp, no more than an hour old. Then came the snap of tension, a breath caught too late. From the back room, a figure emerged, young, lean, dressed like a deputy but wrong in all the details. His hands were bare, his holster empty. Ethan recognized him instantly. "Lucas," he said. The man smiled, not surprised, not ashamed. "Never thought you'd make it this far, Grady." Lucas had once been a rookie under Ethan's command. Eager, sharp, the kind you thought might carry a badge with pride. Now his eyes held something colder than the weather outside. "You forged the entries," Rachel said, voice low. "You accessed the permits. You signed under my name." Lucas didn't deny it. "You think this place matters to anyone?" he said. "To the state. It's dirt and trees. But to the right people, It's leverage control, Peter growled. Lucas moved his hand. Too fast. The shot rang out. Peter yelped and collapsed into the snow, his body crumpling near the doorframe. Blood spread into the floorboards, soaking fast. Too fast. Ethan saw red. He surged forward, knocking Lucas back with his full weight. The two slammed into the cabin wall, fists and fury colliding with years of betrayal. Ethan didn't feel the pain, didn't register the splinters slicing his hands, only the face of the man who had pulled the trigger. "You shot him," he roared. Lucas laughed bitterly, wiping blood from his lip. "That dog cost me everything." Rachel moved in from behind. A single kick to the back of Lucas's knee dropped him. She cuffed him hard, her breath sharp. Ethan was already at Peter's side. The wound was deep, too close to the heart. "Stay with me," Ethan whispered, voice cracking. "I've got you. Just stay." He didn't wait for a stretcher. He wrapped Peter in his jacket, hoisted him into his arms, and began the trek back. 4 kilometers, uphill, snow hammering his legs like bricks. His lungs screamed, his vision tunneled, but he didn't stop. At the Mobile 9 unit, the vet team was waiting. They took Peter from his arms with urgency and care. Rachel stayed with him as he collapsed into the snow, numb and silent. Surgery took hours. When the vet emerged, his hands were shaking. "He made it," he said. Ethan closed his eyes. The arrests that followed swept through the region like wildfire. Every name Lucas had dropped, every file he'd buried, the entire underground network that Dalton had only been a piece of exposed, shut down. They offered Ethan the state's highest public service honor. He declined. He didn't need a medal. Instead, he broke ground on a new project on the land just west of Bitter Ridge, where the forest met the base of the old fire trail. A sanctuary, not just for dogs, for partners. For those like Peter. He called it Haven Point 9 Center, a place where rescue dogs were trained for rescue themselves, where loyalty was taught not through obedience, but through connection. Peter recovered fully, older now, slower, but still sharp, still watching, and every morning Ethan walked the grounds beside him. They trained the new dogs, greeted new handlers, shared the story not with drama, not with fame, but with quiet reverence. And when visitors asked why a scarred German shepherd wore a silver badge on his vest, Ethan would simply smile and say, "He earned it, because in the end, Peter had done more than save a man." He'd reminded him what it meant to fight for something that couldn't speak for itself, to hold a line no one else could see, to love without words and stand without orders, because a man can carry a gun, can wear a badge. But true loyalty, unshakable, unscripted loyalty, sometimes comes on 4 legs, with a scar across one eye and a heart too big to break. And if you're lucky enough to be chosen by a soul like that, live in a way that makes you worthy. Some stories don't need embellishment. They just need to be remembered. Ethan and Peter's journey wasn't about glory or headlines or medals. It was about quiet courage, earned in the cold, and the kind of bond that can't be taught, only lived. It was about what we do when no one is watching, and who we become when someone refuses to give up on us. If you had a partner like Peter, what would you do to deserve their trust? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this story moved you even just a little, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to believe in loyalty again, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories that prove not all heroes walk on 2 legs.